This stunning sculpture was done by Michelangelo when he was only 23 years old, and it established him as an international success. The artwork is titled Pietà. Now, the Pietà is a subject and is your next vocabulary word. Pietà, the depiction of dead Christ on the lap of his mourning mother Mary. And the word Pietà comes from the fact that this image is meant to evoke ideas of both pity and piety. Pietà is an expression of pity and piety. So Michelangelo's Pietà, he's not the first and he's not the only to depict this moment, this scene, these two figures in this position, but we are looking at Michelangelo's version of the Pietà. And so what do we see here? Here is the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus. He sits in her lap, or he's draped across her lap. This is the moment after he has died on the cross and his dead body has been taken down, and prior to being buried or entombed, he's held in his mother's lap. So it is a horrific and terrible scene that we are experiencing here. It's interesting to note that there is no biblical reference of the Pietà, but it has become a common visual within the religion to express ideas of pity for a woman who has lost her son, and piety, because when we look at this, we're supposed to come in with the understanding that the death of Christ is a sacrifice to save humanity. Now, taking those two elements into consideration, I want us to walk around this sculpture. The sculpture is a little over life size. It's carved of marble, and well, it's a beautiful expression of Michelangelo's talent. Now, Michelangelo was trained as a sculptor, a painter, and an architect, and he did all three very, very well. But he saw himself first and foremost as a sculptor. And we can really appreciate not only his talent, but his love of the material, of the medium in the Pietà. The way that he is able to, with a single stone, give us so many different textures, like the thickness of her mantle, the soft suppleness of skin and bone, hair, tendons. Look at these soft ringlets and then the curl of his beard. Michelangelo's Pietà is meant to be contemplated, to look upon and look at these smaller details. It was originally commissioned or paid for by a French bishop who wanted to have a large Pietà placed in front of his tomb that would be in the crypt of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Now, while it still is in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, it's not in the original placement. And we're going to look at it as it stands today. But let's take a look at how this is characteristic of the Renaissance first. Well, let's think about our characteristics. Linear perspective? No, don't have that. Atmospheric perspective? No, don't have that. Pyramidal composition? Yes, look at that. So he's given us this four-sided base with the pinnacle being the head of the Virgin Mary. And remember, what a pyramidal composition does is it creates this calmness and stability. So when we relate the pyramidal composition to these two figures, we see her knees, and then Jesus's knee, and then the back of Mary's hip, forming this pyramidal square base. The apex, her head, and then her gesture draws our attention back down to the base, which is covered by the body of Christ. Now, as I said, this was meant to be contemplated, to be looked upon. And so we would be standing in front of it, and our eye was meant to linger and contemplate the body of Christ. Look at her gesture. Look at her gesture here. What is she doing? She's looking down, but if I was in class with you, I would ask you, what is she doing? She's not holding him tight to her. Instead, her gesture is one open of display. She does hold on to his torso. See this right here? Look at that beautiful sense of weight. But with her other hand, she doesn't grip onto him. What is she doing? She's displaying him. She's showing him to us. And that pyramidal composition further emphasizes by making our eyes stay here at that base, and the gestures stay on the base, stay on the body. Now I ask you to pay attention to that because, as I said, Michelangelo is not the first to do the Pietà, and he's not going to be the last, but the feeling he's trying to give us is one of presentation and contemplation rather than pain and sorrow. This is another Pietà done in the Gothic period. And while the subject matter is the same, the dead body of Christ in his mother's lap as she mourns over him, the feeling is very different. Look at her face. She opens her mouth crying, wailing. Look at his body is emaciated. His head lops back in this unnatural position. The gore of his injuries, where the nails pierced him, is exaggerated. Here, we don't see the agony and wailing mother. We barely see his wounds. This is a zoom up here so you can see. Rather than emphasizing the pain and agony, what Michelangelo's Pietà does is present a woman who is mourning the loss of her beautiful son, beautiful body, and she's presenting him, almost further emphasizing the sacrifice. She's saying, look at my baby. Look at the sacrifice for humanity. Almost as if she is about to give him or lift him off of her lap. Let's take a look at those wounds again. Unlike in other Pietàs where the wounds are exaggerated in pain, Michelangelo doesn't ignore them, but instead he's de-emphasized them. They're not the focus. When we look at this detail here of his arm, look at the modulation of the flesh, highlights, midtones, shadows, yes. So although it's not a painting, it still carries with it the characteristics of a balance of highlights, midtones, and shadows, sure. But more specifically, that's a vein. Now, I don't know how many dead bodies that you've been around, but a dead body doesn't pump blood. A dead body, the veins collapse, they flatline, or they flatten. This is a dead body, but the veins are still full. Why do you think that is? Is it that Michelangelo doesn't know what a dead body looks like? Well, I mean, he knows about anatomy. Not only has he been studying it with the Medicis, but, I mean, it's fairly clear that he understands proportions, and he understands muscle and skeletal structure. with those veins, what Michelangelo is doing is rather than emphasizing the death, he's emphasizing, or he's not emphasizing, he's foreshadowing the resurrection. Now, Jesus, his dead body will be entombed. 3 days later, it is said that he then rises again. He comes out and he's alive. He's resurrected. So Michelangelo's use of these full veins is a way to hint at what is to come. Hint at the life that will rise in 3 days. Here is another detail. So this is that same arm, and you can see the wound is de-emphasized, but the veins around the wound are exaggerated or emphasized or pronounced. I love this image because look at those fingertips. Yes, this is a dead body on a woman's lap. But more than that, the way that those fingers wrap around the fabric of her mantle, to me, let me pull out again. For me, when I see those fingers and the fabric that threads through them, it makes me think of him as alive and maybe pulling or tugging at the fabric. It's a small tactile element that reminds me of a baby who wants to play with their mother's shirt or their mantle, their dress. You know how babies are. They pull and they tug. And here we have a woman, and this grown man is her baby. And we see this pull right there. So not only does it hint at his resurrection, but connects mother and child, even though he is a grown man. Now, as I said, this artwork was originally commissioned for a French bishop's tomb that was going to be placed in the crypt of St. Peter's Basilica. So our view, our first contact, would have been from above. As we walk down a staircase, this would have been our first approach. What do we see here? Well, we see the body of Christ and her gesture, again, one of display. So the emphasis on contemplating the body is initiated from the beginning as we walk down the steps and come toward him. When we look at his face seems to be at peace, doesn't it? We're looking down and it's almost as if he's asleep rather than dead, right? So in terms of the characteristics of the Renaissance, do we see gesture as telling part of the story? Yes. A balance of opposites? Well, we have a balance of life and death. We have a balance of mother and child. There is some slight imbalance here, though. Well, what do I mean? Okay, Michelangelo, he knows about anatomy. He knows about the right proportions of the body. We see that in the body of Christ. However, if we were to really look at Mary's body, her proportions are not correct. We see her torso, and we imagine her hips to be somewhere back here. Then we see her knees out in front. That's a really long lap. Those are some really long femurs. That is not in proportion. So why? Why is Michelangelo throwing Mary's lower body to such exaggerated lengths? Is it that he doesn't know what he's doing? No. He knows exactly what he's doing. What he wants to do is emphasize the connection of mother and baby. A baby fits nicely on their mother's lap. However, a grown man can't do that. So, to make him fit like a baby, Michelangelo extends her lap. And it's done so subtly that we don't even really notice it. Instead, we notice that relationship, that connection. So, as I said, Michelangelo, he knows the rules. He knows them well enough that he knows how to break them without us noticing. To help further drive this point home, here are some other examples of Renaissance artists and Pietas. These are 3 paintings. So we have a work by Carracci, Pietà. See how he's created a lap, but the adult man is not able to fit in his mother's lap, so it's draped down the side. And this one's done prior to Michelangelo. This is by Botticelli. Now see how he's got this awkward bend of the body that emphasizes the death of Christ, but doesn't really give us that kind of comforting nestling of the baby in his mother's lap. And then here's another one. It's not that these are bad. I'm just showing you how Michelangelo is manipulating the proportions of her lap in order to create this more cohesive moment. Now, when this was first revealed, Michelangelo was not very well known, and they didn't know who had done this. And so the story goes, the day that it was revealed to the public, people were freaking out. They loved it, and they were like, "Who did this? Oh my goodness, this is beautiful. This is gorgeous. I heard it was that guy from Naples. Oh, I heard it was that guy from Milan. Oh, I heard it was that guy from Rome." So nobody knew it was by Michelangelo because he was really a nobody. And then as the story goes, Michelangelo's kind of walking around the outside because, you know, he doesn't like people. He's listening to all of them gossip and guess as to who the artist was. And he was enraged. He was like, "Oh, I did it." So the night after it was first put on display, he went back to the statue and he put his name on it, right across the Virgin Mary's chest. On this belted mantle here, he writes in kind of a shorthand. It says, "Michelangelos Buonarroto's Frontinas Fabbricati." It means Michelangelo Buonarroti of Florence made this. It was the only work in his entire career. It's the only work that he ever signed. And later on in his life, people asked him about it, and he said he was kind of embarrassed. He was like, "Nah, I shouldn't have signed it. I was young. It was my ego." Oh, geez. Now, as I said, the work is still in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, but it's not in its original location. It became a huge tourist attraction and was put into a more public space. However, in 1972, a mentally disturbed geologist walked into St. Peter's and attacked the sculpture with a hammer. And there was a huge crowd of tourists and people. And as he was running up to and started to hammer at the Pietà, he was shouting, "I am Jesus Christ, get off of my mother." And shards of the marble started to fly over the church. Immediately he was seized, as you can see in this image here, this news image, but he did make significant damage to the Pietà. So you can see the hand of Mary. There are some marks on her face. Jesus lost a few toes. Now, while he was quickly detained, reconstruction of the marble was going to be difficult, and pieces, large chunks, had gone missing. What had happened was all of the onlookers and all these pieces of marble, they took the pieces of marble home with them as like souvenirs. They were like, wow, I got a toe of Jesus from Michelangelo's sculpture. But during the restoration, the restorer said it would be helpful to have those pieces back so we can reattach them. So the Pope did a public decree asking for the pieces to be returned without any questions, just please give them back, and they all came back. Now, I don't know how it was restored. I am fascinated by art restoration, and I wish I knew the technique. But here we can see previous to the restoration, and then how the restorers were able to correct what was destroyed. She's still on display, the Pietà. However, she is now nestled in a back chapel corner behind bulletproof glass. And this is about as close as you can get to her. But don't be discouraged. I still want you to go to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and I still want you to take a selfie with her.